Ladies and gentlemen, we're back at it again with another Sorousness video, and this time it's about Wuthering Waves 2.2. I know, 2.3 is already released, but there isn't really a big story update for that patch. And what Sorousness has done is she's taken the time to actually break down what made 2.2, that story in Avenolium featuring Cartethyia, Cantarella, of course, and Fleur-de-Lis, and all those different Imperator, Sentinels, Threnodians, all that stuff. What made it work so well? And that's the thing. I believe it's juxtaposed to some of the criticism that patch and that update had in the past before. And so I'm excited to see how this one goes. Because let's be honest, this is kind of just full-on glazing.
What did WuWa do differently to make its latest story work so well? While many people lower their expectations the moment they load up a gacha game, I've always argued that there's nothing stopping them from creating something memorable. The lore behind the scenes is often interesting enough that it could become a good foundation, and sometimes the stories themselves have some great ideas. And the characters? The entire point of these games is to make you want to spend money on them, so surely it's in their interest to make them feel compelling. If anything, gacha should have the most incentive to tell stories which really capture your heart and soul. A few months ago, I made a video talking about the storytelling.
She's entirely right? If your story doesn't feature a lot of characters and it isn't centered around the characters, especially in a gacha title, yeah, it's just typically not going to work out very well. It's typically not going to work out very well from the perspective of, there's a lot of reasons that people like S6 characters like New Valette, there's a lot of reasons why people are so interested in pulling characters like Farina. Because guess what, guys? Genshin actually did a really good job in Fontaine. They did a really good job with the 4.0 story quest. Not like a character story quest, but like the main story quest in 4.0. And I do believe that Fontaine as a whole is widely considered the best region that Genshin ever made. And I agree with it. I think it was actually the high point in Genshin Impact's entire runtime.
A few months ago, I made a video talking about the storytelling in a different game, focusing on some general areas where I found it disappointing. Up until now, WuWa has had a lot of the same problems. After all, many games do. But the latest chapter got almost all of them right. In case anyone watching this hasn't played the quest, for the first half of the video, I'll keep it spoiler-free and
fuck them. Fuck them. We're already on version 2.3. If they weren't gonna play it, they are gonna play it now. It's fine.
Focus on the storytelling, and then move into spoiler territory after that. I might use some footage from later on in the quest, but we'll mix it all up and try to avoid anything particularly revealing, though it could be worth listening rather than watching if you're worried about seeing what is to come. While this was arguably just the next chapter in the line,
that is a lot of consideration, though. It's good that she put that disclaimer in, just in case there's maybe somebody that didn't start the game at all, that hasn't even installed or downloaded it. That's fair.
Larger Rinasci's story arc, it's vital for it to hook you in. Each section of a story should give you fresh reasons to care, questions to answer, goals for the characters to fulfill, conflict to resolve. This quest did a great job at this. You only need the barest context in order to understand the basics. In this world, there are godlike creatures called Sentinels and Threnodians. The origins of Sentinels are unclear, but they seem benevolent and their purpose is to guide and protect humanity, while Threnodians are physical manifestations of the darker aspects of human consciousness and are bent on destruction. Each Sentinel or Threnodian can forge a connection with a single person and share their power with them. The beginning of the story presents clear and interesting questions. Some are more about the big picture. Where are Rinasci's Sentinel and Threnodian, and why have they been absent for so long? Has the region's religion been corrupted? What is the truth behind the history of this place? The ones which caught my attention, however, were focused on the characters. Who is Cartethyia? Which god is she aligned with? Why was she trapped in the sphere? And is she really as innocent as she seems? Cantarella, on the other hand, has a murky reputation and a sly demeanor. What's the truth behind her story? Can she be trusted, or should we be wary of her motivations?
And I think they did so much of that foreshadowing in the 2.0 quest, right? Like in the 2.0 quest as a whole, where there's all of this kind of like shit talk that's happening behind the scenes for the Vesalias, where we're like allied with Carlotta, who, you know, is in direct conflict with them. And it does create a lot of, like, intrigue for you to just want to discover what's going on. And then, of course, right, we get all of, like, that, we get, like, that great ending with Fenrico. Talking about, the Primus Fenrico, talking about, like, what's going on and, like, how, the Blessed Maiden is, like, a liar and all that stuff. And so there's a lot There is a lot of hooks. A lot of hooks bringing you into actually completing this one to get all those questions answered. 1,000,000%.
Who really was the Blessed Maiden? We quickly get some answers, especially about Cantarella, but each one only led to further questions, which were even more interesting, which is exactly how a story should start. And the characters' goals were crystal clear as well.
Yeah, just think about Honkai Star Rail, where the question never gets fucking answered, and you just have like fucking 5 hours of dialogue until one does. And so you're just like, you're made to just go on this one question that you want answered for like 4 fucking hours.
The Rovers is to find the Imperator, the region's sentinel. Their companion Abbey's frequency is weakening, and the Imperator should have the knowledge they need to fix it. This goal was a little sidelined in the previous quests, but it was front and center here. Both Cartethyia and Cantarella join them on this quest since they want to find the Sentinel too. Cartethyia wants to recover her lost memories so she can understand her place in the world, while Cantarella wants to save her people from chaos. When their motivations are clear, the characters become believable and it is so much easier to care. We know the reasons behind every action as they drive the story forwards, and when their motivations end up at odds with one another, we get a much richer and more nuanced conflict. After the previous chapter, I began this one only mildly interested, but it quickly hooked me in. All of these gacha games have an annoying habit of using
I think that her summary is absolutely 1,000,000% spot on. Yeah, I think she did a fantastic job of like breaking down everything that went into the start of the quest, or really before you started the quest.
Paragraphs of text to say something which could have taken just a sentence, and then often repeated a couple more times just in case you missed it. While this quest did have some sections which were a little drawn out, the info dumps in particular,
I think the info dump is sort of fair from the perspective of it was a lot of like rehashing of what happened before, and a lot of players will need that if they're playing it on the day of the patch. We didn't have main story quests in 2.1, and a lot of this quest is a direct continuation from 2.0, which was like literally months ago at this point.
Most of the dialogue was refreshingly to the point. For the most part, those slower sections fit the pacing of the quest, and since they were providing answers to the questions which had been planted earlier, even those were often welcome. And then, whenever the tension ticked upwards, the conversations were more pointed. It's still far from the most compelling dialogue you'll ever encounter, but if this were to be the baseline for the game from now on, it would absolutely stand out from the crowd.
That's just more of like a diss. It's more of like a, this is less of like WuWa glazing and more of like shit talking every other gacha game. You know the ones I'm talking about.
Avinolium, the area we explored throughout this quest, was absolutely stunning. A palace with gorgeous architecture suspended in a dreamlike sky, this whole region is brimming with spectacular views of fantastical beauty. The environmental storytelling here is subtle but so powerful. The buildings are beautiful but broken, their decaying walls and overgrown ruins emphasizing the story's background of a glorious past which has long been abandoned. The world itself is corrupted, and we fight to clear the darkness and find the truth. At first, the palace is scattered and fragmented, with pieces flung far from one another, a fitting metaphor for Cartethia's fractured memories and jumbled sense of self. A pathway as we recover her story sees us reconstruct the palace too. Every step we take towards rebuilding her is reflected in the environment itself as it slowly begins to take shape. By the end, as she remembers all that she has forgotten, the palace is whole once more. And it even extends to the gameplay. The area's unique mechanic is that we can flip the direction of gravity itself, and navigating the upturned world is a visceral echo of how alien even familiar things can become when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down.
I'm not gonna lie, it kind of gave me vertigo. Doing the initial story quest and like getting all of this shit like put back together, Avinolium is like fine to me after you do all like the reconstruction and you put all the broken pieces back into place, but actually doing it in real time, yeah, I almost got a little bit sick, not gonna lie.
Since this whole region is disconnected from the rest of the world, its shape and structure were able to be woven into the narrative itself, and both aspects are stronger for it. And they even made some use of subtext. Subtext is when implicit meaning is hidden in the text but is not stated directly, and it can truly make or break a story. Subtext provides nuance, depth, tension, and character to the dialogue. The friction between what someone says and what they mean can reveal so much about them. For the most part, the dialogue was fairly surface level, but the quality of the voice acting brought enough emotion for all of it to feel natural, and the occasional use of subtext brought enough extra nuance that every conversation felt like it had that extra depth, even
Every sorrow has its own way of fading. That's a good example, right? Right there. Every sorrow has its own way of fading. That's a good one.
when it wasn't really there. The simplest way they did this was by making a character avoid saying something. Often, during Cartethia's conversations with the rover, she would revert to silence, and each time it left space to infer her character. When Rover tells her not to worry about helping figure out whose resonator she is, her silence speaks volumes. Either she's worried, and since that is the driving force behind her actions, she can't just set aside her concerns. Or maybe she's still hiding something, and she's not as trustworthy as she seems. That silence can convey more emotion than any static line of dialogue could have managed, and every conversation which follows ends up feeling deeper too.
But this is the problem with subtext. Subtext is good if your player is smart. If your player has critical thinking, if your player is actually able to like read between the lines and like genuinely like think to the next level, it's good. But if your audience is stupid and full of little kids who literally need to be told exactly what to think or how to feel from what's on the screen, subtext is really bad. Subtext is really, really, really bad in those scenarios. And there's a reason why Genshin has pretty much none of it.
Instead of just random throwaway dialogue, it comes across as characters trying to keep themselves occupied and avoid thinking too much about their fears. Or
I think a big thing about WuWa's story is that it respects the player's intelligence. Things don't need to be overly explained. Things don't need to be, like, overly verbose in order to get the point across. There are different ways of storytelling that I think WuWa does incredibly, extremely well. And that can only be done if the developers themselves are, you know, going into it knowing that their game isn't going to actually be for everyone. Because some people are going to be too dumb to get what's going on in 2.2.
or even just trying to figure out how much
That's like, if that's a diss to somebody in particular, that's like, that was actually not intended.
they can trust one another. I'd love to see them use subtext more, but of course, it's easy for such things to be lost in translation. I'm just happy that there was enough there on occasion that it made the entire story come to life. Cinematography is one place where WuWa has always impressed me, ever since that gorgeous opening cutscene with the mysterious goddess who gave us our tacit mark and set our journey in motion. In this quest, they took it even further. For one thing, the cinematics were incredible and truly felt like
This isn't even a cinematic. This is just a dialogue, by the way. This is a dialogue because the hide UI button and autoplay button is in the top right.
scenes out of a particularly gorgeous animated movie, and yet the transitions from engine to cinematic were almost seamless. Even the more static conversations still felt alive due to the deft use of varied camera angles and close-ups to focus attention and convey emotion. But one thing I really appreciated here was how much of the dialogue happened while the characters were actively doing something else.
Alright, I just need to, let me just, get my shoulders ready to do my HSR pose. I'm the trailblazer, by the way.
Instead of just standing around and chatting, they were at least walking around, but there was even variety beyond that. For example, our discussion with Cantarella during the train ride through spectacular landscapes, or the numerous little chats with Cartethyia while gliding through the stunning vistas of Avenolium on our friendly Echo boat. Mixing things up like this not only saves time, but it
Oh, this gave me vertigo, too.
also provides a much-needed sense of movement to what could otherwise have seemed like bland dialogue. I won't go too far into this yet, since it would quickly get into spoiler territory, but I was also very impressed with the depth of characterization for the characters in this quest. Up until this point, I personally have never really felt much connection to any of the WuWa characters in the past.
Liar. Liar, liar, pants on fire. You know you love Carlotta. You know you love Shorekeeper too. Don't lie. Don't lie. Let's be real here, come on.
There are some I was a little more fond of than others, but for the most
Oh, okay, she covered it.
part, I was unaffected. As someone who craves good stories, this was one of the main reasons I felt a little distanced from the game. Cartethyia is that rarest of all gacha characters, one who grows and changes over the course of the story. Cantarella, meanwhile, is a perfect example of one of the most effective ways to make an unchanging character feel dynamic, by shifting our perspective on them instead. By the end of the story, I absolutely loved them both, and for the first time, I have been well and truly hooked.
I think that's a good point, right? I think the most comparable character that I can think of when it comes to Cantarella is actually from Genshin Impact. You all know who I compare Cantarella to from Genshin Impact? Arlecchino. I think she reminds me of Arlecchino. Yeah, where you're initially supposed to think that, like, Arlecchino is just, like, a fucking cold-blooded assassin sort of, like, deal going on. Like, she's just fucking everything up in Fontaine. And then she's actually one of, like, the biggest proponents of, like, why he gets, like, saved. Right? Or, like, one of the biggest proponents of, like, what's it called? The biggest, like, mask-off 180 moments that you can have in the story.
Cartethyia in particular is an instant favorite. This aspect of the story is likely helped a ton by how focused it is. By having so few characters involved, the ones who are present have a lot more space to shine, and I think it worked wonders here.
I remember when people made that such a big critique in previous WuWa quests, where it was like, oh, the WuWa patch is dog shit because it only featured like 1 or 2 characters. It only featured like 1 or 2 characters in the story, so it was like, yeah, I wanted more people in there. It was bad. But it turns out, I wonder if we could do like a look back on version 1.1 where the main story quest featured Jinsei, and then 1.3 where the main story quest featured Shorekeeper. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people could do a look back and then be like, damn, maybe they were actually pretty good.
WuWa also has that age-old problem where they have clearly spent a lot of time building up some intricate and complex lore, but have struggled to present it effectively. In this quest, they still had several of those long conversations where heavy chunks of exposition are dropped on you one after another. The lore did suffer from being a little too convoluted at times, and I've seen a lot of people say they struggled to grasp the implications of each new reveal when put into context of what we knew already.
That could just be a skill issue. I personally didn't think that the 2.2 story and everything going on was like that convoluted or difficult to understand, but I could see how somebody else who maybe isn't used to that sort of medium, or maybe is just stupider, would have some issues with it.
However, overall, this was a pleasant surprise for me. I feel like the presentation was a big step up, and they more or less managed to do what I've always hoped for with this aspect of the storytelling. They presented the broad strokes clearly and naturally as the quest progressed. That first layer of depth behind the surface level story was easy enough to grasp, and since a large part of the character's motivation is to discover the truth about Cartethia's past, it was natural to feel invested in finding out more. And, as I always said would happen, once the story got me curious about those answers which lurked just beneath the surface, when they started diving deeper, I was still engaged. They were answering questions that I had already been asking, and for once I followed the lore dumps with interest. As someone who reads a lot of sci-fi and fantasy epics, I love it when stories have deep and interesting lore. But I'm not the type who sits down to read through a world guide. Those books can be super cool, but they're rare for a reason. Instead, I want that lore to be integrated into a compelling story. This quest was one of those rare times in a game like this where questions about the deeper workings of the world felt like they mattered on a more personal level, and the info dumping which followed was infinitely more interesting as a result. Since this was such a heartfelt and nuanced
I think that's a very personal sort of take. I think that's 1,000,000% a personal take. It's a take that I can agree with, but I can also see why people wouldn't necessarily agree with that one.
story, it's natural that it has a ton of intriguing themes woven through it. Sacrifice and redemption, freedom and the drive to choose versus destiny and the path set forth before you, the shallowness of good and evil, and the shades of grey which really paint the world. The idea that while you are not defined by your trauma, it is still an indelible part of you. It's impossible to know which themes were deliberately cultivated by the writers and which grew on their own and only really flourished through the player's interpretation of the story.
Yeah, I think she hit all the themes on the top of the head. Yeah, you got Cantarella. You got basically these two featured characters, Cantarella and Cartethyia, both basically having some of the worst childhoods in gacha gaming. Let's be honest here. Probably the worst childhoods in gacha gaming. One's getting constantly fucking poisoned for fun by her family, and also did her second awakening and then also gave up the fucking power. The other one got fucking Threnodianized and then ended up having to like struggle and like fight it and then discover that they got Threnodianized when they thought that they were actually merging, or that they thought that they were merging with the Sentinel. But Imperator was just so fucking stupid It's actually all Imperator's fault for, like, letting in the Thenodian like a fucking virus and then just fucking all this up. If we're being entirely real here.
But either way, this quest had great thematic depth, which made it stand out even more. And, of course, consequences. From a high-level, spoiler-free perspective, I'd say this is also a decent improvement on what you'd usually expect from a gacha game. Cartethyia in particular is a different person by the end of the quest than she was at the start, and
I think that they're only able to get away with this whole Cartethyia thing that's going on and, like, the level of growth and all of that for one main reason. Because she hasn't been released yet. And this might be one of, like, the better ways to, like, you know, integrate a character into, like, the banner, integrate the character into the rosters while still having, like, some cool things happen to them in the story, is to introduce them really early and then have them undergo, like, some meaningful change and then have them on the banner.
her growth makes the whole thing feel memorable as a result. It's possible that the events of this quest will have wider consequences, but those will have to wait until the next chapter of the story. Overall, the most important thing is that the story felt like it mattered to the characters involved, regardless of its smaller scope, and it leaves you wanting more. This was a very good story, and while there aren't many objective things I can point to which make it truly exceptional, they got so much of the important parts right that as a whole it was an absolutely fantastic experience.
I think that's fair. It's a lot, it's the sum of, like, a lot of really, really good parts, but nothing in here is like, oh, this is the best thing that's ever been made for this type of medium. And I think that's the thing, right? When it comes to gacha games, you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be going ahead and, like, trying to push the envelope in a lot of ways, either, like, due to, like, the release schedule or simply due to the fact that if you, like, fuck it all up, it can have, like, disastrous consequences on, you know, this isn't like a game where, like, people buy it, right? And then that's, like, it, and then you're releasing, like, a DLC update or something like that. Like, the characters themselves are a pretty big, important part.
For a long while, I've been on the fence about WuWa's story. I was underwhelmed by much of what we got in version 1, and while the early parts of Renacita were noticeable improvement, I still found myself a little underwhelmed compared to the rave reviews it got from much of the people who played it. I went into this expecting more of the same, and instead got a heartfelt story in a stunning setting with nuanced characters who I quickly came to care about, and led up to a spectacular climax. While the lore behind it all can be a little too much, the actual story itself, the
Whoopsies.
characters who I quickly came to care about, and led up to a spectacular climax. While the lore behind it all can be a little too much, the actual story itself, the motivations of the characters, the actions they take, the conflict they get into, all feels refreshingly human. If this is what we can expect from Kuro from now on, then I'll be thoroughly impressed. Anyway,
I think that that's an interesting take, that it felt, like, refreshingly human, especially when you consider the fact that, like, these are supposed to be, like, two of the most, like, godly figures in Runacita. I'm pretty sure that Cantarella and Cartethyia are actually supposed to be, like, the two closest to, like, actually being, like, divine powers out of everybody on the Raguna Renacita roster. So them feeling like the most human is definitely, like, a very good sort of juxtaposition for a lot of people.
if you want to avoid spoilers, then this is as far as you should go. I hope you enjoy the quest as much as I did. So,
Alright, now
let's
get
dive a
fucking
little
spoiled,
deeper.
bro. Let's do it.
Cantarella is the head of the Thessalias, a mafia-like family with a reputation for being power-hungry and for being fond of poisons. We heard of them in the earlier quest, but knew very little. Early on in the quest, the Thessalia's butler appears to invite the rover to their estate to meet Cantarella.
Yeah.
Chacona warns the rover about the family's
Icona.
Ew. Ew, nasty pronunciation.
dark reputation and their rumored vicious traditions involving poisons, and says that the current head is supposed to be even more dangerous than most. Yet, right from the moment we meet her, Cantarella defies expectations. We go in expecting her to be some kind of femme fatale or manipulative noble, and her demeanor fits the bill. However, we quickly learn that while she clearly cultivates that impression, beneath the surface she's deeply empathic and haunted by duty. Far from being an antagonist, she wants nothing more than to defeat the Threnodian in order to save Renacita and free her family from its malevolence.
I'm not gonna lie though, her appearance and the 17 million poisonous plants growing outside in her garden kind of aren't helping that image. But in all honesty, right? I feel like she uses that negative reputation for her advantage, for sure.
The reason the Thessalians poisoned their leaders is to put them out of their misery. For centuries, the heads of the family have been under constant mental attack from the Threnodian, and it slowly wears away at their sanity. Once they're too far gone, it's a kindness for their successor to take their place. They know the truth, that the Sentinel has been corrupted, and the Threnodian is slowly destroying society from within, and as a result, they are made to suffer. Even though she opens up to the rover very quickly, for once it felt natural. At first, she's hoping to persuade the rover to enlist the help of a sentinel of Huanglong, so it makes sense for her to put her cards on the table straight away. And she
Actual good... I didn't even think about that. That's an actual good lore reason for her to try to get Rover's trust as fast as possible. Because she actually does ask for, like, the help from Jue and Jinsei to, like, deal with this shit.
only truly trusts the rover after seeing the Imperator's sword react to their presence, which proves to her that they're far more important than they seem. This subversion of our expectations was a great way to introduce such an interesting character. Since she's a playable character in a gacha game, it seemed inevitable that she would end up on our side. After all, gachas have a rather tiring aversion to keeping the antagonists antagonistic, but for me, the fact that she had consistent, realistic motives behind everything she did made this work really well. And then, as we get further into the story and learn that she was, in fact, the Sentinel's chosen resonator all along, but that she selflessly gave up her power after seeing just a glimpse of the reality of the situation, I came to like her even more. Despite knowing that she lives in a corrupted world with a broken god, she has the strength to hope for a better future and the courage to follow through even at great personal cost. Cartethyia is a mythical figure in Renacita's folklore known as the Blessed Maiden Fleur-de-Lis. The stories say she was the Sentinel's resonator, destined to vanquish the dark tide which threatened to destroy the world.
This is much different than the deep analysis that I feel like I saw before. Yeah, when I compare this to the deep analysis that I saw maybe a month ago, a couple of weeks ago, yeah, this is entirely different. Yeah, it's a lot better. It's a lot better for sure.
But the head of their religion claims that the stories are lies and that she was actually a minion of the Threnodian.
Yeah, I think the other guy said he didn't give a fuck about her. He was like, yeah, I had no reason to give a shit about this woman.
At the beginning of this quest, she tells the rover that she does not know which is the truth, since she has only vague and confusing memories of her life before she was locked away from the world. Her goal is simple, to understand her past. At first she's innocent, reserved and uncertain. Her trust for the rover again feels natural. It starts off hesitant, but over the course of many conversations as the pair sets out to explore the palace and regain her memories, the seeds of friendship begin to grow. This has been a point where WuWa stories have missed the mark for me so far. Everyone always becomes close to the rover, but it always felt rushed and out of character, and every single one felt a little less realistic to me because the hands of the author steering the story were much too obvious. Cartethia's feelings towards the rover follow the same pattern, but every step along the way felt like it fit. Awkward shyness early on, conversation which felt more surface level at first but deepens as she gets more comfortable, trust which grows as they journey together. An interesting facet to her story is that just like any gacha character, her essence remains unchanged. From start to finish, she's always good to her core, but despite that, she shows great growth throughout the story. While she's uncertain at first and clearly fears that the truth about her past will be painful to discover, as she puts together the fragments of her history, she learns to accept that trauma as a part of her. Her pain forges her into a stronger person, and while it will always be a part of her, it does not define her.
I think she's definitely hitting the nail right on the head. Because there's so little information that we end up, like, finding out about her prior to, like, anything that's going on. I'm pretty sure, like, the main thing is that, like, oh, we are the only ones that can see her. And, like, she can't be seen by anybody else. And then she's, like, stuck in, like, the tower in the sky. Right? And, yeah, I mean, it's just getting to see all of the discoveries that she's making. I guess this is my take. At the start of the quest, I think she's barely even a character at the start of the quest. And, like, the entire quest is, like, finding out who she actually is and, like, in a way, contributing to who she actually is. Versus, you know, having, like, these sort of, like, already established units that are, like, coming in at the start of, you know, at the start of various versions. I think the thing is that, I wonder what her story quest is going to be like. I wonder if she's even going to have a story quest. When she releases, right? When she's playable. Who knows? Maybe she will, maybe she won't. I think that that would be something very interesting to think about as well when we think about like the progression of her story over here. Because when I think about what Cartethyia is like at the end of the 2.2 quest, it still feels like she has a long way to go. It still feels like there's even more stuff that can develop with her.
She learns that she was, indeed, created by the Thronodian and was always intended to be a tool in its quest to destroy, but her past self discovered this fact and chose to fight against her destiny. Even back then, she stood against the darkness. I half wonder whether it could have been even better if she had discovered that she'd been willingly on the Thronodian side in the past, since that would have added even further weight to her new sense of resolve. But the way it plays out right now already works so well. The end
That's a Saeki reference.
of her story was amazing. Before they reached the final battle, she asked the rover to recombine the fractured remnants of her long-lost self and set her free from the world, since that would trap the Thronodian in a lifeless shell, unable to return to wreak destruction. But instead, the rover refuses her sacrifice and intends to settle this their own way. This was a fantastic way to provide the main character with agency, put them on a shared quest with a relatable character, and then have that character make a decision which feels like something they would do, but which is not what we would choose for them. It becomes a moment of conflict between allies, and the rover's refusal expresses exactly what the player would want to do in this situation. The cutscene where Cartethyia joins the rover's fight against Fleur-de-Lis was incredible. She explodes with the power of her second awakening, and the animation and voice acting are just something else.
True. So I guess we did see a second awakening in this quest. I didn't even think about it that way. That Cartethyia was actually doing her second awakening when she turned into the sword.
But when even that is not enough, she makes her final sacrifice, giving all of her power to the rover in the hopes that they can defeat the darkness. After an epic fight, the rover wins and
Oh, just so you guys know, it might be a little bit confusing, but the Cartethyia that we had been hanging out with this entire quest wasn't actually her body. It was like a, it's like a manifestation of like her soul, I would say. Fleur-de-Lis is the actual body.
stabs Fleur-de-Lis through the heart, releasing her from her torment. This whole sequence was exciting, emotional, and utterly beautiful. The Sentinel then finally steps in and uses the last of its strength to grant Cartethyia life.
And that's why we're like carrying the body. That's why she transforms back at the end, right after we stab her.
While this is a very well-known trope, it feels like it was done well here. There's still a lasting consequence, as Cartethyia is granted the choice between either wiping all her memories and losing all of her sense of self, or living with the trauma she endured both as Cartethyia and Fleur-de-Lis. She chooses to reaffirm the lesson she learned throughout the story, that trauma becomes a part of you, and if you can grow beyond it, it becomes a source of strength. Her resurrection does cheapen her sacrifice a little, and I do kind of wish that this conclusion had been left until the next part of the story, so we could really feel that she might be permanently gone, but
nah, nobody would have believed it. Everyone would have been just like, okay, Kuro, the jig is up. We all know you're not gonna spend an entire fucking 3 hours in your story quest hyping up this character, then like actually just not have them release. It's like, everybody knows you're not fooling anybody here in 2025, bucko. Yeah, it would have been the worst kept secret ever. Literally the worst kept secret ever. And I feel like part of that is also, this could just be copium. People already know you're not gonna do it. And so people already know what the truth is gonna be. And so simply not doing it is also a bit like, yeah, we know it's bullshit, so we just didn't even bother wasting the time with it. Just like with Shorekeeper, to be honest.
But it still felt better done than in countless similar stories. Cartethyia's response at the end feels like the perfect conclusion to this part of her story arc. Her new goal is to become stronger than the rover so that she can repay the favor in the future. Her story up until that point was one of reconstructing her sense of self, but at the climactic moment she was dependent on Rover's power. She gave it her all, but even that was not enough. One of the most fundamental facets of her path was her will for self-determination in the face of a past where she was literally created to serve the very force that she wants to defeat. So now that she's looking towards the future, it makes so much sense that she would wish to take that growth even further. Overall, I found her story moving, and she's far and away my favorite character in the game. While the quest's focus was on...
I think she's a lot of people's favorite characters in the game. I think she's not personally mine, but I know she is the favorite of many people after this one. Even though she's not even playable yet.
Cartethyia, and to a lesser extent Cantarella, it's also worth touching on two other characters. Chacona's introduction at the beginning of the quest was great. She already stands out as one of the more vibrant characters in the game, and her forte ability was a great way to both refresh our memory and launch into the rest of the story once our vision was gate-crashed by Cartethyia. Her gleeful spreading of rumors about the Thessalians was also perfectly in character, and the only real complaint is that she was there for such a short time.
The only complaint is that I wanted more. The only complaint about this unit, about this character, is that I just wanted more. I think everyone universally agreed. I think it would have been really nice to see her at the end of the quest. I think it would have been really nice to actually see a little bit of her and Carlotta at the end of the quest. I think that would have been good to sort of like close the loop, because I know Carlotta actually calls us before we enter the Thessalia mansion, and then maybe meeting up with the two of them would have been a good way to cap it off after the whole fleur-de-lis situation.
I'm excited to see more of her. And then there's also Cadanto, an Echo whose story was surprisingly moving.
A fucking Echo, bro? I will say, Cadanto was pretty sad. They should have guaranteed that this bro dropped a Spectrofrazzle. Or they should have guaranteed that Cadanto dropped as either Spectro on the Spectro set or Arrow on the Arrow set. He should have been guaranteed. But I guess this is the thing. Anybody playing 2.2 after the anniversary patch, you can just use your modifier to turn him into not a piece of shit. You can just use a modifier to turn Cadanto into not a piece of shit. AWs, right?
He was Cartethia's first Echo after joining the Order. He trained with her for years, but died saving her life during the fight against the Dark Tide. He returned as a tacit Discord, and even then he defended her sword to the end. Outside of those two, this story was very focused, and while that can feel a little odd for a main quest in a gacha game, I think it was a good direction to take.
I like that idea of like some TDs still like protecting people, even though there's supposed to be like tacit discords and monsters. I feel like that is a really cool dynamic. I want to see more of that.
A recurring complaint I have about gacha storytelling is that while they have intriguing themes in theory, they fail to explore them in meaningful ways and outright avoid morally complex questions. This quest manages to break that pattern. Take freedom and destiny, for example. Cartethia's backstory is a rebellion against the destiny she was created to fulfill, and her present self reaffirms her choice. Cantarella spent her entire life working behind the scenes for the good of all and refused the easy answers in the hope of finding a solution which would lead to a brighter future. Even Cadanto touched on this in a way, his story emphasizing the futility of someone trapped by what they see as their purpose in the world, and the sweet release that can come from letting your supposed destiny go. Freedom isn't about grand speeches and epic fights against evil. It's about the quiet, resolute refusal to let the forces of the world determine who you are and what you should do with your time on this world.
That's what good 2D art looks like, by the way.
And while it was not the main focus, the exploration of good versus evil is refreshingly nuanced. While the foundation of the story is the struggle between the purest good and the darkest evils of the human psyche, the things we learn and the forces we fight turn out to be far more nuanced than you might expect. The gods aside, this story makes the world feel like a place without absolute villains or pure heroes. I only hope that they become confident enough to have some characters remain morally grey even after we get to pull for them. The story's most effective theme was growth from trauma.
I think what a lot of people are thinking, right, is that when Cartethyia is playable, assuming she is playable, which she's 99% going to be, because it would be stupid as hell for her not to, she'll have a second form where she turns into Fleur-de-Lis. And I want, like, that Fleur-de-Lis form to be, like, a fucking asshole. I want them to have, like, unique voice lines where they're just, like, a dickhead. Like, I want them to be, like, I want, like, Cartethyia to be, like, the sweet, nice one. And then when you're in Fleur-de-Lis form, she's just, like, talking mad shit. Like, straight up just talking mad shit. And, like, is like, not, like, pleasant.
The writing refuses to frame trauma as a tragic or permanent fate, or as something which defines a character forever. Instead,
Like, I wanted to say shit like weakling and like stuff like that. It'll be fucking amazing.
it becomes the foundation for growth. Cartethia's story embodies this theme. She was created as a tool for evil, shattered into pieces and isolated for years, but when she finally puts together the truth, she does not break. She feels the sorrow of her past, but does not let it own her. Instead, she finds a way to turn it into a source of newfound strength. Trauma isn't something to be defeated or somehow washed away. It's something you have to learn to live with. But while it will reshape you, it can turn you into a better version of yourself. All these themes are tightly woven into the characters' arcs, and while I would have loved for them to have even more nuanced exploration, they made the story feel far more engaging than it would have been without that depth. I feel like there was some room for improvement when it comes to the gameplay parts of the quest in Avinolium. Clearing out the corruption and then finding your way to stomp the sword platforms to knock huge chunks of buildings back into alignment was a nice idea to begin with, but it dragged a little by the end.
I think that's true, especially because you were stuck in Spectro Rover's trial form. And basically, you're just over here rebuilding the entire fucking map. All you can play is Spectro Rover, and then, like, you're kind of just, like, throwing the little balls over to like make all the purple shit go away. And then I saw the guy do a plunge attack like 40 times.
I'm not sure what they could have done to spice it up, and the story was compelling enough to keep me going, since I always wanted to know what would happen next, but to me it did feel like it was missing something. It was also a little annoying to have repeated fights with only Spectro Rover available. Ever since I started playing Genshin, I've been crying out for these kinds of sequences to let us switch between multiple elemental versions of the main character, since at least then there would be some depth to the combat.
Honestly, that would be a good way to fix it. Give you Spectro and Havoc Rover as a trial, because you fucking get to play all three of them anyways. You get to play all three of them anyways in the final boss fight. And so give you Spectro and Havoc. It's got that shock factor. True. But I guess you have the shock factor of like a 2-minute fight versus the entire segment over here, which is like 30 minutes to 45 minutes. Right, that's a 2-minute fight where you're using all three of them. And then this entire section is like, 30 minutes to an hour.
So imagine my elation when, during the fight
yeah.
with Fleur-de-Lis, we were finally given that chance. WuWa's combat takes that idea to another level since
Dude, they just need to let you, like, do this. Like, please just, like, let us do this in a regular fight, because it's so fucking badass, it's crazy. This is one of the most fun fights I've ever had in the game.
the types of synergy it provides actually dovetail really well with the combination of different rovers, and
I'm not gonna lie, guys, I am really skeptical about how good Arrow Erosion was gonna be, because I saw that shit stack up to 6. I saw 6 stacks of Arrow Erosion, and the damage it did was 6,000. But maybe this Fleur-de-Lis is arrow resistant, and that's why it only did 6k. Maybe Arrow Erosion will do like 12k with the max stacks.
I really enjoyed that part of the fight.
And then Kachona goes in and amps it by 100%. Wait, like 24k per tick? That's a confession Phoebe liberation, bucko.
I understand why they won't let us have rover-only teams in the rest of the game, but please, Kuro, let us always fight like this during story quests. It's just perfection. Another slight issue was the pacing. The lore-heavy aspects got a little...
Imagine if they kind of force you to use rover only, but they give you all 3 copies in some of the future story quests. I think most people would be okay with that, to be honest. Yeah, in like the 2.4 main story, you can only use rover during certain parts, but you get to use all 3. I think I'd be kind of down, to be honest.
convoluted at times, and while I know many are obsessed with its intricacies, I couldn't help but feel that some of its presentation was disappointing. What made this quest shine was the very human story of the characters involved, which was refreshingly heartfelt. The history of Cartethyia and Fleur-de-Lis comes to us in smaller slices, which we discover throughout the story, leading to a very satisfying conclusion once we see the big picture come together. Meanwhile, the other parts of the lore not only left me feeling unmoved, perfect, but they stopped the story's pacing in its tracks at the most vital moment. We had that incredible sequence at the climax which built the tension up to even greater heights and finished off with a beautiful cutscene showing the death of Fleur-de-Lis and then the rover soaring through the sky to catch Cartethia's body before laying her to rest. That momentum was brought to a screeching halt when the Imperator.
Hey, she's not wrong, bro. She's not wrong. Yeah, we get this absolute failure of a fucking Sentinel just telling us how they fucked everything up. We had this absolute idiot horse just talking about how they fucked everything up.
Appeared out of nowhere to drop a ton of lore. This lore is important, but I wish that those details had been seeded throughout the story, just like Cartethia's memories were. Imperator's appearance at the end would then have felt like a satisfying answer to the questions those details would have raised.
I could see why they didn't want people to just find out Imperator was a fucking idiot halfway through the quest. Like, damn, why am I even trying to reach out to this absolute dumbass? They can't even do anything right. Why should I keep playing? Fuck this. I think them saving the reveal that this stupid horse was the reason for all of the troubles in Raguna. Like, it was literally self-inflicted. I think it was fine. I think it sets up, like, a good twist. And then, because all the issues are resolved, you're not, like, as frustrated that this is your pet. That, like, you're the Lord Arbiter of this absolute dumbass.
The conversation would have been both shorter and more impactful. Perhaps this could have been a way to make Cantarella's investigations feel more important too, since she could have gone off to follow those breadcrumbs about Imperator while we unsealed the lost memories.
Yeah, we had to both find out that Imperator was dumb as shit. Cool.
The story as a whole would of course be stronger if we got to spend more time with these characters, since that could have let their relationships grow at a more measured pace and provide much more space for gradual exposure to the lore, but sadly, gachas have struggled to nail that more satisfying style of storytelling over longer periods of time. While this wasn't a groundbreaking story by any means.
So what I was gonna say is that if you're expecting a gacha game with like a 6-week gap between the patches to have like some crazy overwhelming story that like has like a cliffhanger that's gonna be like followed up on and then get into like more overwhelming stuff, I think you might be setting your expectations a little bit high. I think you might be setting some of your expectations a little bit too high. Because that's a long gap. That's a long break versus like a game, right? Think about the best story games ever. Those are like 20, 25, 30 plus consecutive hours. And even like on new version releases, it's not that high. I think WuWa was a fucking long one at 8 in 2.0. Good, but long. And you don't really want to go above that. I think that's what HSR was trying to do with their 12-hour patches, but they're just so dog shit, it's unbelievable. And that's where long stories go bad. That's where long stories go wrong. You just look at HSR and Amphorius.
And it didn't have world-shattering stakes or mind-bending twists. For me, the quality of the storytelling made it stand out. The narrative started strong, moved at a good pace, and ended with absolute cinema. The motivations of the characters were compelling, the voice acting and animations were fantastic, and we got to see some genuine growth for once. And even for those of us who didn't quite follow the convoluted lore at all times, we got enough information to understand. I am finally excited to see where the story will go from here. While I loved the more intimate focus in this quest, it'll be fascinating to see the other characters from previous quests grapple with the implications. And of course, I cannot wait to pull for Cartethyia. Until next time.
I think it was an awesome vid overall. I'm glad that she's excited, especially after her 2.0 story review where she said she wasn't like that, satisfied with the pacing and stuff of the overall story. But I think now, right, it's pretty clear that WuWa 2.2 might be the most well-received gacha story patch in a very, very, very long time to a very, like, universal crowd. I genuinely think the only person I've seen that actively made, like, a hit piece against it was actually Saeki. Genuinely. And a lot of people have the belief that he just skipped the entire fucking thing because of how little he was able to like go in depth when it came to like what actually happened in this story. And it's just like everybody else that I've seen talk about it has said that it was like absolute complete fucking cinema, right? Or he just didn't understand it because it wasn't a visual novel. Yeah, whatever, right? It's just, for me, and I think for a lot of people, and, you know, for Sorosness too, right? This quest checked off a lot of the boxes and has been sort of like one of the big highlights in the entire 2.0 patch as a whole. And I'm just glad, yeah, let me just drop the link for you guys on both platforms. I'm just glad, right, that there are a lot of people changing their minds on Raguna, changing their minds on, like, Renacida, doing all of that because of how well they did when it comes to the implementation over here. That's gonna be that. Let me know what you all think. Peace.